Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about one of the most heartbreaking and mysterious events in the entire history of Westeros, the Tragedy of Summerhall. This is the event that ended the story of two of the most beloved characters in George R.R. Martin's extended universe, Ser Duncan the Tall and King Aegon V, better known to us as Dunk and Egg. Now, if you've been following the Tales of Dunk and Egg novellas, or you're excited about the upcoming HBO series A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, you know these two characters represent something special in Martin's world. They're heroes in the truest sense, a lowborn hedge knight and an unlikely king who spent their youth wandering the Seven Kingdoms together, learning about honor, justice, and what it truly means to serve the realm. But their story doesn't end with triumph or glory, it ends in fire, smoke, and a tragedy so profound that survivors refuse to speak of it for the rest of their lives. The question that haunts every fan of Dunk and Egg is simple. How does their journey end? What happened at Summerhall on that terrible day in 259 AC? And perhaps most importantly, what does their final chapter tell us about the themes Martin has been building throughout their adventures? Today, we're going to explore the tragedy of Summerhall from every angle, connecting the dots between the jovial young prince we know as Egg and the desperate king he became, between the simple hedge knight Dunk and the Lord Commander who made the ultimate sacrifice, and between a dream of dragons and a nightmare that changed the course of Targaryen history forever. Before we dive into the tragedy itself, we need to understand how we got here. When we first meet these characters in the Hedge Knight, Egg is just a young boy with a shaved head traveling as a squire, and Dunk is a newly made knight of questionable credentials trying to make his way in the world. Their relationship is the heart of the entire series. Dunk teaches Egg about the common people, about real knights versus the knights in stories, about making hard choices and living with the consequences. These aren't lessons Egg would have learned in the Red Keep. These are lessons he learned on the road, sleeping under hedges, getting into fights at tournaments, and watching Dunk navigate a world that doesn't care about his size or his strength, only about his choices. And here's what makes their story so powerful. Egg grows up to become King Aegon V, one of the most beloved kings in Westerosi history, precisely because of what he learned from Duncan. We're told repeatedly that Aegon the Unlikely was a king who cared about the small folk, who tried to reform the realm to give common people more rights and protection from abusive lords. Where did that come from? It came from traveling the realm with Duncan the Tall, seeing how lords treated their subjects, watching Dunk defend a puppeteer from Prince Aeryn's cruelty at Ashford, witnessing what real justice looked like versus what passed for justice in the halls of power. Duncan, for his part, rises from a complete nobody to become Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Think about that journey. He's a boy from Flea Bottom, possibly illiterate, definitely of uncertain knighthood, who through sheer courage and determination becomes the highest ranking knight in the Seven Kingdoms. And he does it by being exactly what a knight should be: brave, loyal, protective of the weak, and willing to stand up to princes and lords when they abuse their power. The trial by 7 at Ashford showed us who Duncan really was. When he could have walked away, when he could have apologized to Prince Aeryn and saved his own skin, he chose to fight for what was right. That's the man who would one day command the King's Guard. Now, their friendship doesn't end when Egg becomes king. This is crucial to understanding Summerhall. Duncan becomes a member of the King's Guard, and eventually it's Lord Commander, serving his old friend and squire. They're together for decades. Duncan is there when Aegon puts down rebellions, when he fights the 4th Blackfire Rebellion, when Aegon struggles with his own children who keep marrying for love instead of political advantage. The boy and the hedge knight grew up together and they grew old together, which makes what happens at Summerhall even more tragic. Let's talk about the politics that led to Summerhall, because this tragedy didn't happen in a vacuum. King Aegon V had a problem. Despite being called the Unlikely because he was a 4th son who never expected to rule, he actually turned out to be a pretty good king. He cared about the people, he tried to implement reforms, he wanted to make the realm better. But here's the thing about being a good king in Westeros: the lords don't necessarily want you to be good. They want you to maintain their power and privileges. Aegon's reforms for the small folk made him enemies among the nobility. Then there's the issue of his children. Aegon married for love himself to Lady Betha Blackwood, and he allowed his children to do the same. His eldest son Duncan, named after Ser Duncan the Tall, fell in love with Jenny of Oldstones, a commoner, possibly descended from the first men, but definitely not a suitable match for the Prince of Dragonstone. Duncan loved her so much that when forced to choose between the crown and Jenny, he chose Jenny. He renounced his claim to the Iron Throne to marry this mysterious woman who supposedly danced with ghosts in the ruins of Oldstones. This decision had massive consequences. Duncan had been betrothed to the daughter of Lionel Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. When Duncan broke that betrothal, Lord Lionel was so insulted that he briefly rebelled, declaring himself Storm King and renouncing his allegiance to the Iron Throne. The rebellion was short. It ended when Ser Duncan the Tall, now Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, defeated Lionel in trial by combat. But the damage was done. The king had to smooth things over by betrothing his daughter Rhaegar to Lionel's heir Ormond Baratheon. That marriage, by the way, would eventually produce Robert Baratheon, but that's a story for another day. The pattern repeated with Aegon's other children. His second son Jaehaerys and his daughter Shira fell in love with each other and secretly married, continuing the Targaryen tradition of incestuous marriage that Aegon himself disliked. His third son Daeron apparently pursued a relationship with a knight, though details are scarce. The point is, Aegon's children, inspired by their father's own love match, and by Prince Duncan's example, all married for love rather than political advantage. And every single one of these decisions made the political situation worse. Sir Barristan Selmy later tells Daenerys that these marriage decisions led to treason and turmoil, ending at Summerhall in sorcery, fire, and grief. That's a pretty damning summary. The implication is that Aegon's weakness regarding his children's marriages created political instability that somehow contributed to the tragedy. But there's more to it than just politics. We need to talk about dragons, because you can't understand Summerhall without understanding Aegon's obsession with bringing them back. The Targaryens had ruled for nearly 300 years on the strength of their dragons. Those dragons made the conquest possible. They kept rebellions in check. They were the physical manifestation of Targaryen power. But the dragons died out during the reign of Aegon III, more than a century before our Aegon was born. The Targaryens had tried multiple times to hatch dragon eggs or bring dragons back through various means, and every attempt had ended in failure or disaster. Aegon's own uncle, Prince Aerion Brightflame, had drunk wildfire believing it would transform him into a dragon. It killed him instead, so Aegon knew the dangers. He'd grown up hearing stories about failed attempts to hatch dragons. He'd known Aerion personally and seen what obsession with dragons could do to a man. But here's the thing, Aegon also knew that his reforms were failing, that the lords were pushing back, that his authority was weakening. And he believed, perhaps correctly, that dragons would solve these problems. With dragons, he could enforce his will, protect the small folk, push through his reforms without having to negotiate with recalcitrant lords. The dragons weren't just about power for power's sake. In Aegon's mind, they were the tool he needed to create the just realm he'd envisioned while traveling with Duncan. There's also the prophecy to consider. Jenny of Oldstones brought a woods witch to court, a dwarf woman who Jenny claimed that was one of the children of the forest. This woods witch made a prophecy that would change everything. She foretold that the prince that was promised would be born from the line of Aerys and Rhaella, the children of Prince Jaehaerys. When Jaehaerys heard this prophecy, he insisted that his two children be married to each other, continuing the Targaryen tradition of sibling marriage. King Aegon, despite his personal distaste for incest, allowed it, perhaps because he believed in the prophecy, perhaps because he'd already compromised so much with his other children's marriages. Now here's where it gets really interesting. That woods witch was apparently present at Summerhall when the tragedy occurred, and she supposedly died there. Except she didn't die, did she? In the main series, Arya Stark encounters an old woman called the Ghost of Highheart, a dwarf with prophetic powers who demands to hear My Jenny song in exchange for her prophecies. She tells Arya, "I gorged on grief at Summerhall." The description matches perfectly with Jenny's woods witch. She survived Summerhall, but her friend Jenny probably didn't, and the grief of that day has haunted her ever since. So what actually happened at Summerhall? We don't have all the details, and Martin has deliberately kept much of this mysterious, but we can piece together the broad strokes from various sources. In 259 AC, King Aegon summoned those closest to him to Summerhall, the Targaryen summer palace in the Dornish Marches. The stated reason was to celebrate the impending birth of his first great-grandchild. Princess Rhaegar, daughter of Prince Jaehaerys, was about to give birth, and the family gathered to celebrate this joyous occasion. But Aegon had another purpose. He was going to attempt to hatch dragon eggs. We know from a partially burned letter written by Maester Corso, who was present at Summerhall, that the blood of the dragon gathered in one location, that there were 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods, and that pyromancers and wildfire were involved. The king's own septon had apparently warned against this, but Aegon went ahead anyway. The flames grew out of control, the fire burned so hot that the castle was destroyed, and many people died. Among the confirmed dead are King Aegon V himself, his eldest son, Prince Duncan the Small, the Prince of Dragonflies, and Ser Duncan the Tall, Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Maester Corso also died, along with numerous others. The letter mentions that people died, but for the valor of the Lord Common, suggesting that Duncan the Tall's final act was heroic, that he saved lives even as the castle burned around him. We're told that Sir Barristan Selmy, who would later become Lord Commander himself, believed that sorcery was involved in the tragedy. So why did it go wrong? There are several theories, and they're all horrifying in their implications. The most prevalent theory, suggested by various analysts and fans, is that the ritual required a blood sacrifice. We know from Daenerys' experience in the first book that only death can pay for life. When she hatched her dragon eggs, her husband, Khal Drogo, had died, Mirri Maz Duur was burned alive, and Daenerys herself walked into fire. Life came at the cost of death. The same principle might have applied at Summerhall. Here's one version of what might have happened. Aegon was attempting to use wildfire and blood magic to hatch the dragon eggs. The blood magic required a sacrifice, a life for a life. But maybe Aegon thought he could cheat the system. Maybe he gathered all the Targaryens present and had them each give a little blood, slitting their palms or something similar, thinking that collective Targaryen blood would be enough without anyone having to die. After all, the letter mentions the blood of the dragon gathered in one place. Or maybe, and this is even darker, the ritual was going to require an actual sacrifice, and the chosen victim was going to be the newborn child. Rhaegar Targaryen, born amidst the smoke and salt that would fulfill the prophecy of the prince that was promised. If that's true, if Aegon was willing to sacrifice his newborn great-grandson to bring back dragons, then Ser Duncan the Tall's final act becomes even more heroic and more tragic. Duncan would have stepped in to stop it, to protect the innocent baby, to save his friend from making a terrible mistake. Maybe he grabbed Rhaegar and tried to get him to safety. Maybe he physically fought to prevent the sacrifice. Either way, without the proper sacrifice, the ritual went catastrophically wrong. The wildfire was lit, the blood magic was activated, but there was no flesh to contain the living fire. Dragons are fire-made flesh, and without the flesh, there was just fire, uncontrolled and deadly. Another possibility is that the ritual simply failed because it was never going to work in the first place. Daenerys' dragon hatching was described by Martin as a fantastic anomaly, a once-in-a-millennium event that worked because of a unique combination of circumstances: magic in the world returning, the sacrifice of a witch who had herself used blood magic, a Khalasar's funeral pyre, and Daenerys herself being somehow immune to fire in that moment. Aegon didn't have those conditions. He had pyromancers, wildfire, dragon eggs that had been stoned for decades, and a lot of desperate hope. The magic failed, the wildfire exploded, and everyone in the castle paid the price. What we do know for certain is what Duncan the Tall did in those final moments. The partial letter says, "People died, but for the valor of the Lord Common." Duncan saved people. The most likely scenario is that he saved Rhaegar and her newborn son Rhaegar. Princess Rhaegar was in labor or had just given birth when the fire broke out. She would have been vulnerable, unable to flee on her own. Duncan would have gotten her out, or gotten the baby out, or both, he would have gone back into the burning castle to save others. And at some point, the castle collapsed or the fire simply overcame him, and Duncan the Tall, the boy from Flea Bottom, who became Lord Commander of the King's Guard, died as he lived, protecting others. Think about the poetry of that. Duncan's entire story, from the moment he defended Tencel, the puppeteer from Prince Aegon, has been about protecting those who can't protect themselves. His last act was the same, saving a newborn baby and his mother from a fire caused by his oldest friend's desperate attempt to save the realm. There's a terrible irony in it. Aegon wanted dragons to protect the small folk and enforce justice. Duncan just wanted to protect people, period. And in the end, Duncan succeeded at his mission while Aegon failed at his. The tragedy's aftermath reshaped the Targaryen dynasty completely. With Aegon and his heir, Duncan dead, the crown passed to Prince Jaehaerys, who became Jaehaerys II. But Jaehaerys had been scarred by Summerhall. He saw his father and his older brother burned to death. He had to immediately deal with the aftermath of the tragedy while also preparing for the War of the Nine Penny Kings, the fifth Blackfire Rebellion that began the year after Summerhall. Jaehaerys only ruled for 3 years before dying, possibly of the stress and trauma. His son Aerys then took the throne, Aerys II, who would become the Mad King. So in a way, Summerhall set in motion the events that would eventually destroy the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon's attempt to save the dynasty through dragons led directly to his death, to the traumatization of his heirs, and ultimately to the reign of Aerys, the Mad King, who would be overthrown by Robert Baratheon's rebellion. The road from Summerhall to the Trident, where Rhaegar died, to King's Landing being sacked, to Daenerys growing up in exile, all of it traces back to that terrible day when Aegon tried to hatch dragons. And what about the baby who was born amidst all that smoke and fire? Prince Rhaegar Targaryen entered the world on the same day that Summerhall burned. Some sources say he was born at Summerhall itself. Others suggest he might have been born nearby, but the symbolic connection is undeniable. Rhaegar was born amidst salt and smoke, the salt from the tears shed for those who died, the smoke from the fire that destroyed Summerhall. Maester Aemon, Aegon's brother who had gone to the wall decades earlier, believed that this made Rhaegar the prince that was promised, the prophesied savior who would defend the realm against darkness. Rhaegar himself became obsessed with Summerhall and with prophecy. Ser Barristan tells Daenerys that Rhaegar was melancholy, that a shadow hung over him all his days, born in grief as he was. Yet Summerhall was the place he loved best. He would visit the ruins alone, without even the King's Guard for company, and sleep under the stars in the ruined hall. When he returned, he would bring back songs, sad songs about twilight and tears and the death of kings. People who heard him sing said it felt like he was singing about himself and those he loved, foretelling his own doom. There's a beautiful and tragic symmetry to all of this. Summerhall destroyed Duncan Egg's story, but it also created Rhaegar's story, which would in turn create Jon Snow's story, which connects back to the prophecy that started all of this. The prince that was promised, whether it's Rhaegar, Jon, Daenerys, or someone else entirely, exists because of that Wood's Witch's prophecy, which led to Aerys and Rakila's marriage, which produced Rhaegar, whose obsession with prophecy led him to Lyanna Stark, which triggered Robert's rebellion, which destroyed the Targaryen dynasty but also set in motion whatever the ultimate resolution of the series will be. George R.R. Martin hasn't shown us the Summerhall tragedy directly yet. He said he plans to write more Duncan Egg stories, eventually covering their entire lives, which means at some point we'll read about Summerhall from their perspective. Can you imagine how heartbreaking that's going to be? We're going to watch Egg, this optimistic young boy who wanted to be a good king, slowly become desperate enough to attempt something this dangerous. We're going to see Duncan, loyal to the end, trying to protect his friend even as that friend makes choices that will destroy them both. And here's what makes it even more tragic. Neither of them was wrong in their desires. Aegon wanted to help the small folk and create a just realm. That's a noble goal. Duncan wanted to protect people and serve his king. That's what a true knight does. But Aegon's methods, his willingness to use dangerous magic, his desperation for dragons, that's where it went wrong. And Duncan, loyal Duncan, couldn't save him from himself. The hedge knight could beat any opponent in single combat, could win trials by 7, could command the king's guard, but he couldn't save his friend from making a fatal mistake. There's a lesson here about power and desperation, about how even good people can make terrible choices when they feel backed into a corner. Aegon wasn't a mad king like Aerys would become. He was a good man, trying to do good things, who convinced himself that the ends justified the means. Dragonfire could enforce justice, could protect the weak, could make his reforms stick. All it would take was a little wildfire, a little blood magic, a little sacrifice. Except the price turned out to be much higher than he expected. Think about all the parallels this creates throughout the series. Daenerys successfully hatches dragons, but she does so at the cost of her husband, her child, and a woman's life, and those dragons then cause untold destruction. Aegon wanted dragons to save lives, Daenerys gets them and they take lives. Aegon failed in his attempt and it destroyed him. Daenerys succeeded and it's both blessed and cursed her ever since. The message seems to be that dragons are not the answer. They're not the magical solution to complex political problems. They're weapons of mass destruction that bring as much harm as help. And what about Duncan? His story is the counterpoint to all of this magical thinking. Duncan never wanted magic, or dragons, or prophecy. He just wanted to be a true knight, to keep his vows, to protect people, and he succeeded. His final act saved lives. He died a hero, but he's mostly forgotten now, just another name in the Book of Brothers, while Aegon is remembered as the unlikely and Summerhall is remembered as a tragedy. That's the way of the world in Westeros. The quiet heroism of a true knight gets overshadowed by kings and dragons and prophecies. But here's the thing, Duncan's legacy lived on in ways he never could have imagined. It's strongly suggested that Brienne of Tarth is his descendant. She carries his values, his sense of honor, his willingness to protect the weak no matter the cost. Old Nan tells Bran stories about Duncan the Tall, keeping his memory alive generations later. And Duncan's influence on Aegon, even though it couldn't prevent the tragedy, shaped a king who tried to make the realm better. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. The ghost of High Heart still mourns what happened at Summerhall decades later. She survived, but she gorged on grief that day and has never recovered. She knows Jenny's song, that sad melody about dancing with ghosts, and it makes her cry every time she hears it. Jenny, who probably died in the fire, danced with her ghosts, the ones she had lost and the ones she had found. Now, the Woods Witch dances with her ghost, with the memory of her friend, in the halls of kings who are gone. That song, Jenny's song, it's not just about Jenny of Oldstones, it's about Summerhall itself. It's about everyone who died there, everyone who danced in those halls before they burned. It's about Duncan the Small, who gave up a crown for love. It's about Aegon the Unlikely, who tried to save his kingdom and destroyed himself. It's about Ser Duncan the Tall, who died saving others. And it's about all the ghosts that haunt that ruined place. Literal and figurative, the ghosts of what might have been if Aegon had chosen differently. If the dragons had never died out in the first place. If prophecy hadn't driven men to desperate acts. Rhaegar used to sleep in the ruins of Summerhall and compose songs there. What must that have been like? Lying in the place where you were born, where your great-grandfather and his best friend died, trying to fulfill a prophecy that you now believe referred to you or your children? What songs would you write about twilights and tears and the death of kings? Rhaegar's whole life was shaped by Summerhall, by the circumstances of his birth, by the prophecy that drove his great-grandfather to attempt the impossible. And in the end, Rhaegar died too, struck down on the trident by Robert Baratheon. His own quest for prophecy fulfillment leading to his doom. The cycle keeps repeating. Targaryens reaching for power, for dragons, for prophecy fulfillment, and paying terrible prices. Aegon at Summerhall, Rhaegar at the Trident, Aerys in the throne room, Viserys in Vaes Dothrak. It's only Daenerys who's managed to break the pattern by actually hatching dragons, and even that has been a mixed blessing at best. As we wrap up here, I want you to think about what Summerhall really represents. It's not just a historical tragedy, it's the moment when the story of Dunk and Egg, a story about simple honor and friendship and trying to do the right thing, collides with the larger forces of prophecy, political necessity, and magical power. It's the moment when Egg stopped being the hopeful young prince who wanted to help people and became the desperate king willing to risk everything. It's the moment when Duncan couldn't protect his friend from himself. and it's a warning that echoes throughout the entire series about the price of obsession, the danger of believing too much in prophecy, and the limits of even the best intentions. We don't know if George R.R. Martin will ever show us Summerhall directly. The Dunk and Egg novellas are progressing slowly, and Martin has The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring to finish. But whenever we do get that story, it's going to hurt. We're going to watch our heroes walk into a trap of their own making. We're going to see Egg convince himself that he has no choice. We're going to watch Duncan try and fail to save him. It will be beautiful and tragic and painful, which is exactly what Martin does best. The Tragedy of Summerhall is how Dunk and Egg's story ends, in fire and smoke and grief, with a newborn baby crying amidst the ruins and a woods witch who will mourn for decades. It's not the ending these characters deserved, but it might be the only ending that made sense for their story. Because this is a song of ice and fire, and in Martin's world, even the best men make terrible mistakes, even true knights can't save everyone, and prophecy is a double-edged sword that cuts deepest those who believe in it most. So remember Summerhall. Remember what happened when a good king became desperate. Remember Duncan the Tall, who died a hero. Remember Egg, who tried to save the realm and destroyed himself instead. Remember Jenny dancing with her ghosts, and the woods witch who gorged on grief, and the baby born amid salt and smoke who would grow up to be another tragic prince. Remember it all, because Summerhall is the heart of tragedy in Martin's world. The place where hope burned to ash, and the shadow of dragons fell across generations yet unborn. That's all for today. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened at Summerhall, and whether you believe we'll ever get to read the full story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.